Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about what happens when open access doesn't work. Specifically, we're going to be looking at piracy, where people illegally download or share content that isn't open access. Some of these slides are recycled from a presentation from my own research. So apologies if they're not clear or things like that. Some of them are for a different audience. For today, you did read two articles. You read John Bohannon's piece about who's pirating. That's a very good overview of Sci-Hub and the scientific community's response to that particular pirate website. You also read a conference paper of mine and my colleague looking at ICANN PDF on Twitter, which at the time when we wrote it was a new phenomenon. Today we're going to be talking about both of these in more detail. This landscape is composed of a lot of things that are not these pirate resources. These are not considered open access. If you recall from the film we watched in Paywall, Peter Suber, one of the open access sort of original authors of the movement, has described open access is not really interested in upending copyright or changing necessarily traditional publishing, just adding this other venue. Sci-Hub, ICANN PDF, and these other pirate type resources are very much interested in upending copyright and sort of are viewed as revolutionary in this way. Some of the people in those movements have called themselves guerrilla open access to create some sort of alignment between those two movements. However, mainstream open access would say these are very much not part of our movement. What's interesting is at the same time, traditional open access has grown simultaneously along with these guerrilla websites. So they're not necessarily feeding off of each other, but they are growing at the same rate. And it's important to keep in mind that this has been going on a very long time. So for example, sometimes people like to think that piracy is a new thing. It's only because of the internet. But no, it's been happening since the commercial introduction of Xerox photocopiers in 1949. If you've ever used a photocopier in a public place, maybe a library or a Kinko's or something like that, sometimes it'll have a sign on it saying that you agree to follow copyright law. And that means you agree to not illegally copy things that you're not supposed to according to copyright. And then, of course, we have email, we have the laser printer. PDFs were released as a file type in 1993. They're highly portable. That's part of the name, portable document format. And that has allowed for piracy to really take off in terms of scholarly research, books, journals, things like that. In terms of piracy of scholarly materials, it really kicks into gear in 2004. Post-Napster, post-music piracy is when scholarly piracy becomes more of a thing. And some of that has to do with increased publishing requirements in academia and research as a whole. Research really starts to explode in the early 2000s, and millions more articles are being published than ever were. In 2009, we have r/Scholar, which is a Reddit community. And then in 2011, we have both ICANN PDF, the Twitter hashtag, and the first Sci-Hub is created. So how did we get here? I sort of alluded to it. But part of this is the explosion of college attendance, both in the United States and in other countries, particularly those countries which may have been seen as traditionally developing, have new emerging research infrastructure. So they may not have some of the scholarly publication publishers or things like that quite yet, and yet they're being subjected to the same kind of requirements to publish and do research, and they need to find research themselves. So there's sort of been this huge influx into the Western market from these other countries as well. At the same time, Western commercial scholarly communication systems, so think things in Europe, United States, and Canada, are sort of failing to meet the demands of international researchers. Things like maybe publications are only in English or really expensive, not really designed for a global marketplace. Then at the same time, we have increased internet penetration into worldwide, really. So local sharing efforts can scale up, and then we have these sort of global black markets. So how do people actually pirate content? Well, there's really two different modes. First, we have crowdsourcing. This is sort of a decentralized, person-to-person kind of approach, and there are a few ways that this happens. In the conference paper about ICANN has PDF, you may have seen some example tweets. And I've put some up here on the board that are a little bit older that I've saved. So this is a Twitter phenomenon that I started seeing and was curious about, and then ended up being the first person to really do research on it. But essentially, I was seeing things like links or citations or DOIs, and then saying, an email with the hashtag ICANN has PDF. It's derived from a meme that predates, I imagine, many of you in the class, but it was cats, and it was ICANN has cheeseburgers, and cats who said silly things and had bad grammar, and for some reason, ICANN has stuck around, and so we have ICANN has PDF. And then the tweet in the center of the screen, I highlighted as a particularly interesting example because you may recall that when authors publish something traditionally, they often sign over the copyright of their piece to the journal that they publish with. That means they may not own the official PDF version of their paper unless they have a subscription or their library has a subscription to that journal. So in this case, we have an author actually looking for the paper that they have written because they no longer own it or have access to it once they signed over their rights. And definitely saw many of these in our research, not just one. So what me and my colleague did is we used a web program. We scraped all the tweets. They had to be up for 6 seconds, so it's possible that we missed some. And we just analyzed what were people requesting. Really, nobody knew much about this in 2015. So what we discovered is that almost all the requests are for journal articles. And we anticipated that most of them would be fairly new, probably 50% or more, published within the last year. And the reason we thought that was because many libraries, including CSUDH, have a lot of subscriptions, but sometimes the publishers embargo. They say we can't have maybe the latest 6 months worth of content to encourage people to have individual subscriptions. So we figured, you know what, most people are going to be trying to get embargoed content. But we were wrong. There really was a wide range in terms of the years that people were requesting. There was also a wide request variety. It wasn't just the most expensive journal. In fact, only one journal had 16 requests from it. But we saw over 494 unique different journal titles, really speaking to the proliferation of research that's out there and people were trying to gain access to. And well, we did see requests from every kind of discipline, so the humanities, music, art, social sciences. Most of the usage did come from biomedicine and health sciences. These journal articles are both the most expensive and also, obviously, if you're doing medicine, really important to have the latest research. So we asked a few other researchers who were doing some work at this time for their data, so their sort of unpublished data, and we compared it with our own to kind of track the increasage of ICANN has PDF. So this doesn't include retweets, but it's really continued to grow at the same pace, usually multiple thousands per month now. In terms of how this is taken off or not among professors, it's pretty slim. It's mostly students and those not affiliated with universities who are using ICANN has PDF. So this is a national survey that goes out to professors every other year. It asks them all kinds of stuff. And in 2016, in part because of our research, they actually added a question asking, what happens when you don't have a journal article? Do you search for a free available version online through open access? Do you use interlibrary loan, which is usually a service that's free to people at a university? The library pays for the article and emails it to them. Do you look for something different? Do you purchase it yourself? Do you ask a friend? Do you email the author? What do you do? And for professors, most of them start by searching for a freely available version and then using their library's interlibrary loan system. But there wasn't an insignificant amount, almost 1,000 people who responded, so they request a copy using something like ICANN has PDF on Twitter. So it's definitely taking off in all segments of the research population. Another method of crowdsourcing is Reddit. Reddit is a website with different boards focused on different topics. And so in this case, there is a Reddit board called R Scholar. It started in 2009, and it's essentially people trading files, much like they were on Twitter in 2011. So the files are shared. People usually use Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that, downloading something from their library and trading it with somebody who doesn't have access. These websites also promote other pirate websites, which we'll talk about later on in this lecture. And there were many what we call long tail requests. So a lot of weird, unique things, not really any pattern in terms of the years or disciplines being requested. One interesting thing about piracy is that the Twitter user base is a little bit older, averages in the 40s, but those using R Scholar to trade articles, a little bit younger, mostly students. And R Scholar has seen a steady growth of use. It had approximately, adding 3,000 users per year. And then all of a sudden in 2017, it just doubled. So it went from around 30,000 to 60,000, and now it's up to over 70,000, back onto a steady pace. But definitely something happened in 2017-18 where the need for research exploded and people did not have access. So you might be asking, who are all these people? Who are these people who are trading ICANN PDF and Sci-Hub and all that stuff? Well, after the article we wrote in 2015, we had the same question. We knew what people were requesting, but not who they were. So we did a survey of R Scholar users, ICANN PDF users, and some LibGen discussion boards. Hard to figure out who pirates are when they don't want to be caught, right? But we did our best. We got about almost 200 people to respond to this particular question. And you'll notice that a good 45% of people are undergraduate or graduate students, followed by professors or professional researchers who work at universities. And then only 26% are people who are not affiliated with a university at all. They're just researching for fun. So you can see quite a lot of these people should have some sort of access through their library. And really the last method of crowdsourcing would be closed and public Facebook groups. There's a lot in here, right, where people trade articles just like they do on R Scholar. Oh, and I also forgot this. There's also a journal article about how professors primarily share research, and usually it's one-to-one through email or, say, an internal network. Maybe you print out an article and pass it around the hallway where you work. Now, typically that is allowed under copyright law, which is what makes it so interesting when it moves to the digital age. It's not really allowed to do that on a website, but it is allowed, in your hallway typically, or person to person through other means. And that will become important in people's reasoning as well. So besides the crowdsourced libraries that we talked about, where people are really trading one-to-one, I'm a person, I ask somebody, and a person fulfills my request, we have this other mode of piracy, and these are actually full-on centralized pirate libraries. If you used, Napster or Kazaa, or again, I think all of you are maybe too young to have potentially used those things, but BitTorrent or other kinds of pirate websites. For music or video games, they also exist for scholarship. And many ask, well, how do these work? How do they run? Well, just like anything, there are manuals, and so the Open Access Guerrilla Cookbook outlines how you might run a particular pirate website. You learned a lot about Alexander Elkiaban in the paywall documentary we watched, and you saw there are many people who kind of view her as a figurehead, but speculate that there are many people behind the scenes of the website she runs, actually scouting databases, hacking, writing scripts, hosting their website, and so on. So there are several pirate libraries. AVAX Home used to be the place to go, 2012. It was huge. These numbers are from 2016 that you see on the screen. And this was used in predominantly Western countries, so Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and the United States. And it global rank, I know 280,000 doesn't sound important, but it actually is for an online website globally. LibGen, this one is predominantly books and textbooks, also used to be very popular. The numbers are going down dramatically. It's even down further now. And this is where we start to see other countries like Iran and China who have typically restricted access, both because of government censorship and just the way universities are funded. And you can see they are heavy users of this particular website as well. And then the one that you read about in the John Bohannon article, sort of the reigning champion of the moment, is Sci-Hub and its many, many mirrors. The global rank for this website, according to Alexa, which is an Amazon-owned web analytics company, it's the 1,000th most popular website in the world, which is a pretty big deal. This is up significantly from 2017, which is up significantly from before that. And you can see in the John Bohannon article you read that this includes pretty much all the content from the top 3 for-profit publishers, including Elsevier. In terms of who is accessing this, it's a little bit more mixed. We have developing countries, China, Indonesia, and Brazil, who are developing that infrastructure for research, and India. But we also have United States as a pretty heavy user of the site as well, when seemingly we have access through universities most of the time. So we asked a researcher for some of his unpublished data, and we compared it to our own unpublished data and made these fancy charts. But one of the critiques against piracy is that, oh, it's only young people. And so we wanted to point out that it's really not. It's more heavily concentrated between those 26 to 35, perhaps the age of a graduate student or a new professor, maybe some undergrads, but there is not an insignificant percentage of folks using it who are older. So it's not just something that people are doing because they are young and lazy, which is a common stereotype given to piracy. So why do people pirate? Well, that was the next question we have. What are they pirating? Who are they? And then why? And this is really hard to figure out because, again, pirates don't want to tell you. They don't want to, be caught. So there are a few reasons why. There's definitely a group of folks who believe that all material should be free, that there should not be traditional publishing systems that we have that, heavily rely on paywalls. A person who's often considered a figurehead of this movement is Aaron Swartz. He passed away by suicide in the mid-2000s, but he wrote the Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto. He worked quite a bit to stop legislation called SOPA, which was about online piracy. He's also one of the co-founders of Reddit, if you're familiar with that website. He's a really interesting person, great documentaries out there, and I've also linked to his Wikipedia page, which is pretty active. But essentially, he represents the folks who say, hey, piracy is an act of civil disobedience. We shouldn't have to pay for research ever. There's another group of people who I think are best represented by notable mystery author Agatha Christie, who says, piracy or anything, it's not necessarily some grand political ideology. It's just maybe idleness, laziness. It's pretty easy to pirate scholarly research, sometimes pretty easier than going through legitimate means or faster. So Agatha Christie kind of represents that particular approach. And then finally, we have people like this participant in our study who said, you know what, I live in Chile. Access to literature is extremely patchy. I don't really have any kind of ideological aims. I'm not necessarily lazy. I just literally have no other way to access this research. So those are sort of the 3 threads we saw when interviewing participants. So we asked folks and then we coded their responses using qualitative themes. And most people, it was some combination of access and speed. I either don't have access at my institution or I could get it through interlibrary loan, but it would take 10 days. And that's just not acceptable for my research. Beyond access and speed, user experience was pretty substantial. When you're trying to access paywalled content, I don't know about you, but how many times have you forgotten a password, or you have to click on a link, to click on another link, to click on another link, to find another password, right? So that can be significantly cumbersome, and obviously, pirate websites don't require that. Then there were some folks who said, cost, I'm not going to pay for something if I don't have access. Very few in our particular study about requesting had ideological aims or political reasons or, fighting against open access to request things. Here are some example quotes that we saw. So this person says, I'm not sure if I need the article, right? I'm only using the abstract. I don't want to buy it yet unless I'm really going to need it. So unless I'm going to cite it or rely on it regularly, in which case then they'll ask their employer to buy it. But they don't want to ask their employer to buy things if they don't know if they're going to really read them. So we ask people, why do you contribute either articles or time to these pirate resources? And a lot of people viewed these one-to-one crowdsourcing options as really communities. So it was really about like, well, if I'm going to take an article, I have to give one back to keep it going. I care passionately about this. I care about the community, things of that nature. And these quotes were pretty representative of that. I generally do 2-to-1, giving 2 articles the same day you ask for one to keep the community alive. We also asked people what did they think about potential violations of terms of service or copyright agreements. We were careful not to say that this was happening because we didn't want to antagonize people, but just said, what are your views regarding the potential violations of these things? And by and large, folks just did not care about copyright law or their terms of service that they've agreed to. Now, here is where when you ask about copyright, we started to see people have more ideological lenses. A significant percentage said all information should be open access and free. There was definitely a group that hated a particular publisher or two. We coded those as animus towards publisher. And then there was a smaller group that said, you know what, this is just me handing a paper to my colleague next door in a different age. So it's actually not a violation of copyright, um, which publishers would disagree with, but here we are. And so here are some quotes related to that. We're hardly breaking a multi-billion-dollar industry. They'll be fine. This particular person says they would gladly publish their own data for free if it was easy, but they work on a research team with a PI, which is a principal investigator, the person in charge of the research project, and the other people on their team don't feel the same way. When we asked, why don't you use interlibrary loan or when do you use interlibrary loan? Typically, people used it as a last resort. They used it, after they tried these other pirate websites. So I used it before I tried iCanHa's PDF, and the delay is a point. Maybe the scans are not very accessible. If I can't find it any other way, then I'll ask my library to pay for it through ILL. We asked people why they used Sci-Hub, and regardless of these objection to profits or information should be free or convenience or any of that, the primary reason is just no access, right? So researchers, particularly in the Global South, who have no access to some of this work. And that didn't vary by age. No access was the leading cause for why you would do this regardless of age. So here are some of the other responses we saw that didn't really fit neatly into a category. As a last resort, if I don't have access, I'll use these resources. I hate publishers, essentially, or this particular librarian in the study who believes in open access and is using Sci-Hub to get students that their university library does not have access to. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether or not Sci-Hub will disrupt the traditional scholarly publishing industry. People who say no usually are people who don't have access. People who said yes tended to use Sci-Hub for other reasons, perhaps convenience. So there are a lot of questions in this for libraries, right? So how many of these pirate transactions could or should take place through a library? A lot of our funding is based on, we had this many people access something, therefore we need to continue subscribing to it. And there are some particular, like small college towns, so things like Bloomington, Indiana, or in this case, Utrecht, which I believe was in the Ukraine, where they looked at IP traffic logs for those particular cities and discovered that a lot of the content was already available through the library. So it suggests that people were likely requesting these materials due to convenience. Interlibrary loan can be pretty fast. At Dominguez Hills, it takes about a week or two, not super fast. But at other larger, more well-resourced institutions, it's usually 24 hours. However, according to participants in our studies, that would not be fast enough to compete with resources like Sci-Hub, which are pretty much instantaneous. There's also been a lot of debate about whether or not libraries should even discuss these things or talk about them. So, for example, my colleague and I, after we published our research, we actually got a very nasty letter from the American Association for University Publishers sent to our bosses saying that we were misusing academic freedom and promoting the use of these websites. So I just want to be clear, I'm not promoting the use of these websites, but I do think it's important to understand because they are part of the scholarly communication landscape. For the whole scholarly communication movement and publishing of research in general, how should open access relate to guerrilla open access? Right now, it's just sort of everybody ignoring everybody. Um, and then I think the biggest concern that open access folks have is that these pirate websites are actually going to push publishers into more traditional, draconian, authoritarian directions. For example, many universities, so USC, where I just worked previously, has two-factor authentication to access any of their journal articles. You have to use your phone to get a code to log into your computer. There's also digital rights management software being added to PDFs, similar to how you can't easily download software and then trade it around. People are trying to do that to PDFs as well. And then there's also talk about moving away from PDFs, using something like HTML5 entirely. Because the PDF and its portability is exactly what makes it so easy for pirates to use. So, big picture questions I don't have the answer to, but I'd be curious what you all think. What should the role of copyright be? And we'll talk more about copyright too next week. And then lastly, I will leave you with a quote from Alexander Elkiabon. Of course, as you've learned in the movie Paywall, Elsevier, she has arrest warrants. She has all kinds of warrants out for her, civil lawsuits, and so on. She hasn't been caught yet, and she continues to run her website and its many mirrors. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of resources listed on this last slide, including, if you're really curious, I have another article on this topic from 2017. It's open access, and the link is there, and there's a lot of other interesting research.